The Gonzaga Bulldogs have now filled every scholarship for this upcoming season, and this program is perfectly set up for both the present and the future.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Tuesday, and welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. Folks, these days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster, and they do it for free. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. Well, folks, we broke the news on Monday morning. Ismaila Diagne is the official 13th and final scholarship member of the Gonzaga Bulldogs. We talked about that on Monday's show. We're going to talk a little bit more today about how the Zags are perfectly set up for the future and for the present. We're going to take a look at the front court in the first segment. We're going to take a look at the backcourt in the second segment. We're going to close out the show with some mailbag questions that we were unable to get to on Monday's show, talking about private equity in college athletics, talking about title sponsors for the Big 12, for the WCC, what that might look like. Get into that to close out the show. But here's the deal. Ismaila Diagne, who we've heard rumors for almost, if not more than 2 weeks at this point, that he was going to be Gonzaga's final scholarship piece. It finally came together. He'd announced over the weekend that he was leaving Real Madrid. He penned a thank you letter, thank you post to them. Didn't indicate at that time whether he was coming to Gonzaga, although a lot of the comments on those posts were like, hey, congrats on Gonzaga, congrats on going overseas, et cetera, et cetera. We finally get the announcement Monday about 7:30 in the morning Pacific time that he is officially going to be that final piece for the Zags. 13 players on scholarship. Here they are quickly. We'll get into more detail on, the front court and the back court here. Ryan Nembhard, Nolan Hickman, Khalif Battle, Dusty Stromer, Steele Venters, Emmanuel Innocenti, Braeden Smith. Effectively, those are your guards who are on scholarship for this upcoming season. Again, Braeden Smith is redshirting. We know that. We'll talk about that, but he does still take up one of your scholarship spots. Just because you're redshirting doesn't mean you're not still on scholarship. In the front court, you have Graham Ike, Ben Gregg, Michael Ajayi, Braden Huff, and Ismaila Diagne, all filling spots there. And Jun Seok Yeo, all filling spots in the front court. That is how you get to your 13 total scholarships. And what I've loved about this offseason, and for those of you who are everyday listeners, you know we've talked about this. Shout out to you, by the way, for being an everyday listener. Those of you who are on the Discord channel, we've been talking about this quite a bit there as well. Mark Few was very intentional this offseason about putting together a roster that would compete right now for a national title. That is always the goal. There is no goal bigger than putting together the best, most competitive roster right this second that can compete for a national title this season. There's never any other goal. That is always the goal. But Mark Few did a great job and the staff, I don't want to put it all on him, Stephen Gentry, Brian Michelson, RJ Barsh, everybody on that staff did a really good job of looking at the present and future and finding a way to take the 13 scholarships that this program is allotted, just like every program in college basketball, and figuring out how to best utilize each and every one of them for this team in the present and the future. Not every team is doing this. Those of you who maybe just follow Gonzaga, who don't really pay attention to the rest of college athletics, college basketball, a lot of programs are publicly opting to only fill 9, 10, 11 scholarships because they're like, well, if we fill those final spots, it's just guys who aren't going to play enough. We're not going to play a 13-man rotation. We're only going to play 8, 9, 10-man rotation at most. Very few teams in college basketball even play 10-man rotations. So these coaches are saying, well, I don't want to put guys on scholarship who aren't going to play at all, and they're just going to transfer next year. John Calipari straight up said, I don't feel like developing players for somebody else, which is funny coming from a coach who has predominantly used one and dones where he is developing players who effectively go to the NBA. So Mark Few and the Zags took a different approach and said, yes, we agree with the sentiment that we are not going to play 10, 11, 12 guys. They may not even play 9. 9 feels like the minimum this year, but we have said that many years in the past, and we have been wrong almost every time. Mark Few is consistent at playing 8 guys, sometimes 7, rarely 9. But Mark Few thought, okay, there's a way that we can fill those scholarship spots. And if we can find the right personnel who are willing to come here and develop behind the scenes. Or in the case of Braeden Smith, straight up redshirt, where they're not even burning a year of eligibility. We bring in those guys. We fill the final spots on our roster with those kinds of players. And then we are set up for the present and the future. Because the fact that Mark Few has a roster right now that is set up to be competitive for a national title this upcoming season and has multiple key pieces that will be back in the coming years, that already in itself is impressive. The fact that he has done that with just one freshman on this roster, and that's Diagne, who just signed, and no currently confirmed incoming freshmen in future classes, none. That will change. We've talked a lot about the 2025 recruiting class, players like Isaiah Harwell and Nick Kamenia and Davis Fogel, who may end up being in Spokane in the future. But for right now, there is no future commitments. And the only incoming freshman is Diagne, who committed as I'm recording this today, as you are listening to this yesterday. The fact that Gonzaga has set themselves up for multiple years of success without even really dipping very far into the freshman class is extraordinary. It's a master class in roster building in a way that I don't think I've ever seen any coach be able to successfully pull off. So I want to talk front court here in the first segment. We'll talk backcourt in the second segment. We'll close it out with those mailbag questions. Front court for the current season, the present, Graham Ike, Ben Gregg, Michael Ajayi. You are totally set up with those three guys. Ike has 2 years remaining. We'll talk about that. But both Ben Gregg and Michael Ajayi are entering their final year of college basketball eligibility. They are here to win it all right now. And then for the future development in the front court, Mark Few has Braden Huff, who has 3 years of eligibility remaining. He now has Ismaila Diagne, who has 4 years of eligibility remaining. And he has Jun Seok Yeo, who has 2 years of eligibility remaining. This team is prepared regardless of what decision Graham Ike makes. That's the big hinge for Gonzaga's front court in the future. Graham Ike has 2 years of eligibility remaining this upcoming season and then a year after that. A lot of the expectation is that he won't use that final year. He's already been in college for a very long time. If he has a successful season this year, he doesn't necessarily need to return. It doesn't boost his draft stock. I'm not sure he's a draft prospect anyway, but he could then move on to play professionally after that. He could also come back. The opportunity to stay in college to make money at Gonzaga through NIL may be more appealing than overseas options or G League options if that's all he feels he's getting offered after this upcoming season at Gonzaga. This upcoming year, the front court rotation will be Graham Ike, Ben Gregg, Braden Huff, Ismaila Diagne, and Jun Seok Yeo, with Michael Ajayi, I believe, playing a lot of his minutes at the 4 as well. The following season, if Ike comes back, you will have Ike, Huff, Diagne, Yeo. That is a great 4-man rotation front court right there. And if Ike does not come back, you still have Braden Huff entering his 3rd season, expected to step into a starting role and be fantastic. You have Diagne, if he's still in the mix, if he hasn't already moved on to the NBA, he's going to be in the mix for that season as well. Yeo, if he wanted to stick around, would still be in that mix. Then the Zags could supplement via the transfer portal if they lose Graham Ike, and they're still really set up nicely in the front court. It's hard to imagine that Diagne won't be ready to contribute as a sophomore. So if they need him to contribute big minutes because Ike's gone, he can. If they don't need him to contribute big minutes because Ike's back and Huff's still in the mix, that helps them too. Then he can still be a bit more of a developmental piece if that's what he wants. And if that works out system-wise, I think that could be a really big developmental piece that could kind of be in Gonzaga, be at Spokane for a couple of years. So they also have Nick Kamenia potentially in the mix as well. 6'8" forward from Harvard Westlake High School, a player they've been pursuing for many, many years in the 2025 recruiting class. He could be somebody who steps into maybe not a huge role as a freshman, but certainly be a future piece for Gonzaga in that front court going forward with or without Graham Ike in that mix. Now I want to talk about what Gonzaga's backcourt might look like, because they have 3 guys entering their final season of college basketball eligibility, which makes the addition of Braeden Smith an absolute godsend for Mark Few and the Zags. And we're going to talk more about that in just a second. Right after I tell you about today's sponsor, LinkedIn Jobs. Folks, when you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. And that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs, because LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster. And folks, they do it for free. And LinkedIn is not just another generic job board. They help you hire professionals that you cannot find anywhere else, even those who are not actively searching for a new job, but who might be open to the perfect role. And in a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. So hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is also constantly finding ways to make their process even easier, which includes launching a feature that helps you write your own job descriptions, which makes that process much quicker. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. We're still talking about Gonzaga's 13 scholarship players on this roster. It is full. It is finalized. They are done with roster construction for this upcoming season. Obviously, they are still pursuing players in that 2025 recruiting class. The window to talk to 2026 recruits is also open, and we might start hearing some updates on some of the players in that class that Gonzaga is pursuing as well. But in terms of what this upcoming season roster is going to look like, barring some kind of medical situation or a late change of heart by one of the transfers, this roster is done. It is set. They got 13 scholarship players there. They got a couple walk-ons coming in as well. This team is ready to roll for next season. We talked about the front court. We talked about what it's going to look like next year with Ben Gregg entering his final year of eligibility, with Michael Ajayi entering his final year of eligibility, with Graham Ike potentially about to play his final year of college basketball. We don't know for sure, but he has 2 years left. A lot of people expect he's about to play his final year. Now I want to talk about what the backcourt looks like, because 3 of Gonzaga's backcourt players, the 3 players who are going to have the ball in their hands the most and play the most minutes in Gonzaga's backcourt, are all entering their final year of eligibility. That would, of course, be starting point guard Ryan Nembhard, spent 2 years at Creighton, spent last year at Gonzaga. This is about to be his senior season of college basketball. That would be Nolan Hickman, who has been kind of all over the place at Gonzaga as a backup point guard, starting shooting guard last year, now entering his 4th and final season at Gonzaga, expected to kind of, for the first time in his career, have the same role year over year and be that starting shooting guard for the Zags. You also have Khalif Battle coming in, guy who started his career at Butler, spent a couple of years at Temple, spent last year at Arkansas, has been in college basketball for a very long time due to injuries, COVID eligibility, all that good stuff. He is at Gonzaga, expected to come off the bench and fill a very valuable role as a microwave scorer. But all 3 of those guys are about to play their final year of eligibility. So they are here for the present. They're not here for the future. They are here for the present. I'm going to include Steele Venters in the conversation as a player who is primarily here for the present. A lot of similarities with Steele Venters and Graham Ike. Players who both have COVID eligibility, players who both medically redshirted a previous season in their career. For Graham Ike, it was 2 years ago. For Steele, of course, it was last year after missing his entire first season as a Gonzaga student because he tore his ACL right before the season began. So both those guys have 2 years of eligibility remaining this year and then the following year. Similar to Graham, we don't know if Steele's going to come back or not. It depends a lot on how this year goes. We're fairly confident in Graham's role. He's going to be the starting center. He's going to get the ball a bunch. He's going to put up big numbers. He's going to be an All-American candidate. All of that is kind of what we expect from Graham Ike next season. It's a lot more difficult to project Steele Venters' role. We spoke about this on a recent episode that was dedicated entirely to talking about Steele Venters. Is he going to be a player who plays big minutes? Is he going to start? Is he going to be an 8th, 9th guy where he's barely getting minutes? Like, there's a lot of variety in what Steele Venters' role could look like next season. Part of it depends on his health, how he recovers from the injury. Part of it depends on the players around him, how they're developing. That primarily includes Dusty Stromer in that conversation, whether Gonzaga wants to play Ajayi primarily at the 4, what they want to do with Khalif Battle. All of those things are kind of impacting what we're perceiving Steele Venters' role is going to look like this upcoming season. And that determines how we feel about whether he's going to return. If he doesn't play very much next year, maybe that means he's more likely to return and take on a bigger role when Ajayi and Battle and those guys are gone. Maybe it makes him not want to stay in the program anymore. Maybe he plays a big role next year and decides he wants to pursue a professional career and be done with college basketball since he's been a student for 6 years. Maybe he plays a big role next year and decides he wants to come back. Like, there's a lot of different options and kind of scenarios that could play out with Steele Venters. He's one of the most difficult players on this roster to really pin down in terms of what his future and current status is going to look like as a member of the Gonzaga Bulldogs. But what we do know is that Gonzaga also has players on this roster who are here primarily to be future contributors for the Zags in the backcourt. One of them is Dusty Stromer. He's both. The expectation is he's going to contribute to this team again this year, just like he did last year as a freshman, where he started his first games because of the injury to Steele Venters. Stromer has 3 years of eligibility remaining, however, so even though he's going to be a piece that contributes to this team this year, he has 2 years after that where he's likely going to take on a larger share of the touches, of the minutes, of the possessions for Gonzaga going forward. You also have Emmanuel Innocenti, transfer from Tarleton State, 6'5" guard, was very good last year as a freshman for the Texans. Averaged about 6.5 points, about 6.5 boards, a lot of steals, a lot of assists, played a bunch of minutes. He is not going to be a big contributor to Gonzaga this season. The general expectation is he's 10th or 11th in the rotation, which pretty much means out of the rotation. There is not a 10th player in Gonzaga's rotation. There almost never has been. So Innocenti is probably going to get, 6-7 minutes here and there, maybe 8 or 9 in games Gonzaga gets blowouts, and in a lot of games he might not play at all. But he's got 3 years of eligibility remaining. So if he doesn't redshirt this season, which I don't think that he's going to, he would still have 2 full years of eligibility after this year. And again, with Nembhard and Hickman and Battle all gone and Venters potentially gone as well, that clears up a ton more playing time for him to step into a bigger role after this season. But the big fish, the big reason that Mark Few's offseason has been so successful is the addition of Braeden Smith. From Seattle, spent the last 2 years at Colgate in the Patriot League, was Patriot League Player of the Year, about 12 points, about 5 assists per game last year. He not only committed to Gonzaga as a transfer this offseason, but he is intending to redshirt this upcoming season. He will not play for the Gonzaga Bulldogs this year, which means he will have 2 full years of eligibility after this season. This is monumental. We've talked about it a handful of times in the show, but it is worth continuing to reiterate. One of the biggest challenges that Gonzaga faced last year was having Ryan Nembhard and Graham Ike adjust to their new roles on the fly. Yes, they got here early. Yes, they practiced together, they worked out together, etc. But they were on a new team in a new system with new teammates around them. Additionally, the injury to Steele Venters pushed Dusty Stromer into a role that he was not expecting or comfortable with necessarily. It put Anton Watson in a new role as a more offensive focal point, something he had not been. And Nolan Hickman was adjusting to being off the ball. Everybody was in new roles last year. And we saw the challenges that came with that in the early part of the season. And Mark Few looked at this roster and thought, well, we're not going to have those issues because Nembhard and Ike, because 4 of their 5 starters are back. We expect Michael Ajayi to probably figure out his role a little bit faster than, everybody who struggled last year because he's the only newcomer trying to find a new role. Battle's basically playing the same role he's played in the past, so that shouldn't be a problem. So you look at this roster and you could have, if you were Mark, you could have said, all right, we're ready. We're not going to have the same issues we had last year. We're going to come into this year with a well-oiled machine like we were in the second half of last year, and we're going to compete for a dang national title. And everybody would have been happy with that. I would have been happy with that. But Mark Few said, you know what? With all of my guards about to graduate, with the big addition we're making in the backcourt being a guy who only has 1 year of eligibility in Khalif Battle, I want to make sure we're set up that doesn't happen again. Because he can go get guards in the transfer portal. Mark Few's going to be able to get guards in the portal. He's a guard whisperer. The success of guards at Gonzaga is so well documented and well known that high-profile guards are going to transfer to Gonzaga. It is going to continue to happen like it has in the past with Nembhard, with his brother Andrew, with Nigel Williams-Goss, all the way back to Dan Dickau. This team has landed high-profile guards in the transfer portal. But Mark Few doesn't want to deal with a half season where the guard is trying to find their spot in the offense. They're trying to get their bearings straight. So he goes out and gets a guy who's capable of starting for this team, who is capable of leading this team, who is the next great Gonzaga point guard, and says, why don't you sit on the bench for a year, learn from Ryan Nembhard, learn from Nolan Hickman, practice against them, make them better in practice, make yourself better day in and day out. And then from day one in the 2025-26 season, we're ready to go because you already have been here for a year, just like Nigel Williams-Goss was when he sat out for a year, just like Dan Dickau was when he sat out for a year. You've already been here. You get it. You know the system. You know the offense. You know the ins and outs. That is setting up Gonzaga to be immediately successful in the 2025-26 season, even though they're going to lose 4 of their 5 starters and potentially all 5 if Graham Ike leaves. They're going to have a point guard ready to take over the reins. They're going to have a combo guard in Emmanuel Innocenti who's ready to take on a bigger role. They're going to have Dusty Stromer entering his 3rd season, and he's going to be chomping at the flipping bit to be a big-time player for this Gonzaga roster. I guarantee you he is going to be ready to take on that role. You have a big man in Braden Huff who's going to be ready to step into a bigger role as well. You have an incredibly exciting big man in Ismaila Diagne who's going to be ready for a bigger role as well. This team is unbelievably set up for not just this upcoming season, but for the 2025-26 season and frankly beyond. And again, all of this has been done without any future commits, which could change. Isaiah Harwell could commit to Gonzaga. He's making his decision on September 12th. The Zags are in his top 4. There's a real chance he's in Spokane in 2025 alongside Braeden Smith, alongside Emmanuel Innocenti and Dusty Stromer. Davis Fogel, high riser in that class, now a borderline top 50 prospect in 2025 from Anacortes. 6'7" wing. He's coming to Gonzaga in about a week and a half. He might commit. If he doesn't commit then, he might commit soon. He's another guy who could be in the mix with Stromer and Innocenti and Smith and potentially Harwell and all those guys. The fact that Mark Few and the Zags have built this roster to be competitive this year and beyond, and they've done it without securing high school commitments, is incredible. Once those start to roll in, look out. Well, private equity and title sponsors are coming to college basketball. There's no debate, no doubt. That is a thing that is happening. We're going to talk about what impact that might have on Gonzaga, on conference realignment, and on the WCC. All that coming up in just a second. Right after I tell you about today's sponsor, FanDuel. Folks, it is finals time in both the NBA and NHL. Baseball is in full swing, and FanDuel, folks, it is your place to bet on every single game, because right now new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. So bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all in an app that is safe, secure, and super easy to use. And if these last two segments haven't gotten you fired up about what Gonzaga looks like this upcoming season, I'm not sure what's going to, but here's the deal. Gonzaga's at plus 2,000 odds to win the 2025 National Championship. This is the time. Maximize those profits. Maximize that win. Go to FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic W. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, folks, segment 3, Steele Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. Moving away from our conversation about Gonzaga's present and future and how well this roster is set up to accommodate both, to get some mailbag questions that we were unable to get to on Monday's show, as we talked about Ismaila Diagne's commitment, as well as Isaiah Harwell listing Gonzaga among his top 4. Push some of the questions to today's show, so we're going to answer them here, talking about title sponsors in college basketball, as well as private equity, what it means. We got 3 questions here to get to. This first one comes from Nope Not Me on Discord, who says, it sounds like the Big 12 name is potentially going to be sold to a corporate sponsor. If that happens, do you think other conferences will follow suit? What do you think would be a great name for the WCC? Well, first of all, other conferences are already following suit, and in fact are arguably ahead of the Big 12. Conference USA is reportedly in conversations with Globe Life Insurance, who is also the title sponsor for the Texas Rangers baseball field, to potentially have them be the new title sponsor for the conference. Globe Life Conference USA or Globe Life Conference have both been kind of thrown out there as potential rebrandings for Conference USA. And reportedly, the Conference USA presidents and athletic directors, who are the people who are going to vote on whether this is going to happen or not, are pretty in line with wanting this to go forward. That is not the case in the Big 12. Brett Yormark has some work to do to convince some of the ADs, to convince some of the presidents to go forward with finding a title sponsor and changing the name, the All-State 12 or whatever it's potentially going to look like in the Big 12. There is still some pushback amongst the voters on that happening in the Big 12. For Conference USA, it kind of sounds like they're pretty much full go. They're ready to roll. So don't be surprised if the Big 12 is not the first conference to have a title sponsor and a name change. Wouldn't be surprised at all if Globe Life Conference USA is the first official title sponsor for a Division I major conference in college athletics. In terms of what the WCC could change their name to, I had a little fun trying to find a few, just trying to pick some that make sense from bigger companies and local and names that could work. Pete's Coast Conference, Pete's Coffee, obviously a West Coast company, West Coast brand. Feels like coffee would be a fun kind of company to be the title sponsor for the WCC. It would have to change to the PCC. Don't know if we love that, but Pete's Coast Conference, it's got a nice little ring to it at least. West Coast Customs Conference, there is no way that this is going to happen, but it reminded me of watching this show when I was a teenager, the West Coast Choppers, and all the fantastic fun that show was. It's a West Coast company. They're located in California. It's not going to happen, but it's the closest I could find a way to keep the name sounding similar to the WCC with West Coast Customs Conference. Also, Wells Fargo Conference. Wells Fargo is a Bay Area-based company. I really hate that. I don't want to be the WFC. I don't want to be named after a giant bank like Wells Fargo, but I guess it's better than the Starbucks conference. Nobody's going to want to be that either. Be very fascinating to see if/when the WCC starts pursuing title sponsors and what that might look like. This is very intriguing. It's not fun. I don't think anybody likes title sponsors for, sports arenas or for things like conferences, but it feels like that's the direction we're going. And so there's not really a lot we can do to stop it. So I think we might as well start getting ready to embrace whatever direction this goes in the future. Next two questions here on the show come from Jeff. Jeff says, if Brett Yormark is successful in using private equity to deliver another 20 to 24 million in annual revenue to Big 12 schools, could that be the key for Big 12 schools to approve Yormark's desire to create the Super Basketball Conference that would include adding Gonzaga and UConn? I would think this doesn't help, to be honest. It certainly helps Gonzaga and UConn have the desire to leave their conferences and join the Big 12. But that wasn't what needed to be changed. Gonzaga and UConn already want to join the Big 12. I can't speak as much on UConn, although I don't know why they wouldn't be interested in joining the Big 12 if the Big 12 would have them. Gonzaga obviously is very aggressively wanting to be in the Big 12. There's not a secret about that. If this happens and these schools get this extra 20 million, obviously Gonzaga and UConn would both be brought in on a smaller scale, but that scale would be bigger, if that makes sense. Gonzaga's still only going to get probably 20% of what the football schools get, but 20% of a much bigger piece, a much bigger pie is a lot more money for Gonzaga. It makes the Big 12 more appealing than the Big East, which it already was before, but it kind of even widens that gap. But I don't know that it encourages the Big 12. The Big 12 is about to get a big influx of money to all of their institutions if this were to happen. And there's a lot of people in the Big 12 who are kind of uneasy about about letting private equity come in and give these schools a bunch of money. I think the last thing those schools want to do is if they finally reluctantly agree, okay, we can have a title sponsor or we can have private equity, helping to fund this conference because we're going to make 20, 25 million more dollars. The last thing they want to do is then turn around to vote to give some of that money away. They're not going to want to be like, okay, fine, we'll allow our schools to make an extra $25 million, but here we got to set aside some of it for Gonzaga. I don't think that the schools that are already anti-Gonzaga are going to change their mind. I guess that's the best way that I could put it. It makes it more appealing for Gonzaga to join the Big 12, but I don't necessarily think that it moves the needle in terms of making, the only way it could is if Brett Yormark was trying to withhold this and say, hey, the only way we can get you this extra money is if you agree to accept Gonzaga and UConn. I don't see why that would happen. This private equity firm doesn't really care if Gonzaga or UConn are in the Big 12. I don't think that Brett Yormark is going to withhold this incredible opportunity to make millions and millions of dollars because he wants Gonzaga and UConn. He wants them. He don't want them that bad. So I don't think that this really changes that equation. And if it does, it's probably a negative for Gonzaga and UConn trying to get into the Big 12. Final question of the show, another one here from Jeff via Gmail. Jeff says, while private equity has the potential to bring in all sorts of additional revenue streams for schools and conferences, it also brings major risks. With all the positions Brett Yormark has had before he became Big 12 commissioner, could he be suited to lead the Big 12 private equity risks in ways many other conference commissioners are not? Could the same also be said for the WCC's Stu Jackson? Most conference commissioners have had a history of being in the private sector, of working for big businesses, of kind of navigating these kinds of private equity dealings. Brett Yormark is not unique in that regard, neither is Stu Jackson. I think the biggest thing is you have to be a salesman. Or a salesperson, excuse me. You have to be able to sell conference or school leaders, athletic directors, presidents. You have to be able to sell them on your vision. You have to be able to sell them on the things that you want to do. Brett Yormark wants to get private equity involved because he wants his schools to make the same amount of money as the Big Ten schools. He can get those deals done. He can talk to those companies and get those companies invested, but he needs to be able to sell that to the athletic directors and presidents. That is the biggest thing you need to be able to do as a conference commissioner, is get your school administrators in line and in agreement with what you want. Brett Yormark's very good at that. Stu Jackson, I think he's pretty good at that. He's made big moves since he took over as the WCC commissioner. That's a good sign that he has the ability to do that. To me, that's what matters more than anything else. Can you sell the people who vote on the decisions you want to make? Can you sell them on your vision? Because there are going to be WCC commissioner, or WCC athletic directors, WCC presidents who don't want a title sponsor, who don't want private equity in the conference. It's not being really, it hasn't been proposed publicly yet. But again, if this ball starts rolling in that direction, it's going to happen. It's going to be talked about amongst WCC leadership probably very soon. And I'm pretty confident a lot of people who vote are not going to be on board. Can Stu Jackson convince them? That's what he needs to do. And he needs to listen to them. If they don't want it, find out why. Find out if it's the right decision to not pursue that, even if it hurts the conference financially. That's part of his job. I don't think that he or Brett Yormark are any more equipped to do that necessarily than other conference commissioners. It's just a matter of how they can package this to the voting powers in their conference to make them do whatever vision they have, whatever they want that conference direction to go. It's going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. Folks, thank you so much for making this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. We're going to be back later this week. More talk on the WCC, more talk on conference realignment as it comes up, some conversation about Anton Watson's pursuit of being selected in the NBA draft next week. All that and more coming up this week on Locked On Zags. Stay tuned. Thanks again for listening. And until next time, as always, go Zags.